Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this new webinar in the Front Dark Nexus and Dolores webinar series on aquaponics, aquaculture, and hydroponics. Today, we will talk about energy and business aspects. Together with me is today Dr. Emmanuel Benjamin from the Department of Development and Economics Policy from the University of the Bundeswehr in Munich. He's an agricultural and development economist. Unfortunately, you will only hear from him in the last part of the webinar because we had some problems with the recording and I have to redo the first part of the webinar without Ben. So sorry for that. Today we will look, as I already said, into the energy aspects of aquaponics and energy consumption and system safety. And after that, in three other parts on the business aspects of aquaponics. We will talk about how to do a business plan or develop a business based on aquaponics. We will look a little bit into cost-benefit analysis and talk about the typical challenges that we run into when we want to create our own aquaponics business. Some of you might wonder why we're talking about energy consumption and energy aspects in the same webinar as the business aspects. Main reason is that energy consumption is such an important part of the cost structure of our aquaponic systems that there's really a strong link between the business model and the energy consumption of our system. And second, it's quite important also in terms of system safety and redundancy, so that our business doesn't fail because of power shortages, for example. And we did not have enough time to talk about that in previous webinars, so that's why we included it into this one. So let's get started. First part of today's webinar is, as I said, about power consumption and system safety and the different components in our aquaponics system that require electricity. The main power consumption usually comes from our aquaculture or from pumping the water in our system. So that is not only in the aquaculture, but also in the hydroponics part of the system. And we see that there are potentially many parts in our aquaculture that might use energy, but the main part usually is a pump here located between the biological filtration and the disinfection. But in general, we can say that the more intense our aquaculture is, so the more fish we have per cubic meter of production volume, the more energy we would need, because we would have to do more efforts to ensure the right water quality for our fishes. The main parts that consume power in our aquaponic systems with, I would say, minimal system equipment, so really low-tech and simple aquaponic systems are circulation pumps that we need to circulate the water in the aquaculture and also in the hydroponics. We would try to get away with only one place where we put a pump and operate the whole system by gravitation to interconnect the different components of the aquaculture and also of the hydroponics. Same goes for aeration. Here also we would try to only have one aeration pump that produces enough air for the whole system. Here again, we need to provide enough oxygen to our fishes, but also to the bacteria that transform ammonia to nitrate, and also to the plant roots in the hydroponic systems, depending on the growing system that we use. In some systems, it might make sense to combine the water pumping and the aeration system, like with airlift pumps, but this is really only suitable for really small systems because we only can achieve a very low head lift with airlift pumps. So it's feasible and it might be very energy efficient because we then only have one device that consumes energy, that aerates the air at the same time that it lifts up the water to a high level. I went into more detail about the choosing of the right pump in aquaponic systems in the webinar about operation of RAS systems. Just as a small reminder here, we really should always look into taking the optimum pump for our requirements, meaning that if we need a certain head that we want to pump our water up to be able to operate the whole system afterwards with gravitation, and a certain flow rate, we should see that the needed flow rate and the head we need are about midth of the maximum values given for hydraulic power and hydraulic pressure in our data sheet of the pump, because this is the point where we have the maximum efficiency of our pump. And it's at the same time the point where the pump will last the longest because it's less used at the optimum operation point. So if you know the head you need for your system and the flow rate, you should always choose a pump that delivers about twice these values as maximum values for flow rate and hydraulic pressure. If we are having systems that are a little bit more sophisticated, because, for example, we want to do a little bit more intense aquaculture with more fish per cubic meter, then we might have also the need for more sophisticated devices to assure the water quality for our system. This could be, for example, drum filters for solid removal that are more efficient than only sedimenters, but those also need additional electricity, for example, for the rotation of the motor, for the rotation of the screen, that has to rotate from time to time to be cleaned, and also for the pump that delivers the water for cleaning the screen. Same goes for oxygenation. If we can't get away with aeration anymore because of the high intensity of our system, we might need oxygenation. And one of the possibilities might be to use oxygen cone like we see in the photograph here. And these also need an additional pump to create some overpressure inside of the cone to provide good oxygen solubility in our water. Then we might need additional devices to clean our water, like UV reactors or ozone. And in both cases, we would also need additional electricity to power, for instance, our UV tubes or to power an ozone reactor that creates the ozone that we need for our ozonization of the water. But also on the hydroponic side, there are some installations that we should also consider, like the greenhouse control. So the computers and devices that operate the greenhouse, that open the windows automatically or close the windows. Additional ventilation for air movement in our greenhouse might be needed. Then in hotter regions, it might be necessary to cool down the greenhouse with active cooling, like we see here in the second photograph, with walls where we trickle down water. And in this case, we would again need a pump that pumps up the water to the cooling wall, and additional fans that provide air movement through the greenhouse and through the cooling walls. As I already said, we need oxygen for the roots if we use deep water culture systems, but also a circulation pump that pumps around the water in our hydroponics. And in smaller systems, of course, this can be the same pump that also circulates the water through the aquaculture. So our aim, especially for smaller systems, is to only use one place where we pump. I already said that, but it's quite an important point. And then in larger systems, again, we might need additional electricity for the assimilation light. So this largely depends also on the location where we create our aquaponics business. In regions with more sunlight and less fluctuation over the year, we might not need that. But for example, in Northern Europe, it's very important because in winter times we don't have enough light to provide year-long production of our, to allow year-round production of our produce. Some things to consider regarding system safety and redundancy are that for some of the components, we really need redundancy. So this two are aeration pumps and water circulation pumps. Redundancy means that we always should have one spare pump of these types as backup in our storage, so that if the aeration pump or the circulation pump fails, we can quickly exchange it and make the system run again. And another means of redundancy might be that we use two smaller pumps that provide together the flow rates that we need for our system. But if one fails, we still have half of the pumping power to keep our system running. And that gives us a little bit time to react and to replace the failed pump before our fishes or plants might be harmed. And the same goes for the electricity supply. If we are living in an area or creating our aquaponic system in an area where we have frequent power outages or failures of the grid, it is very important that we have either batteries that can provide electricity when there's a power outage, or an uninterruptible power supply, or a power generator if we need more energy in a larger system. And lastly, it might be very useful to have some monitoring devices that have sensors and alarms for malfunctions that inform us quickly when we are not present at the system at weekends, for example. So if pumps or power fail, we should be informed immediately so that we can take action to correct the problem and again prevent our fishes or plants from harm. One possible solution for systems that have frequent power outages is to develop systems that look into the direction of off-grid aquaponics. And in my last webinar, I already said that there's some potential in the biogas production that we can achieve with our own fish sludge and also the plant waste that we have in the system, that at the same time improve our nutrient use efficiency. But this can also help to power, for example, generators in case of power outages that could use the methane that we produce with our own biogas production that we could store in suitable gas storage tanks and make work an electricity generator with this biogas afterwards. So this being said, we can see that the reliability of the power supply is quite important, but that there's also a substantial need for energy in our aquaponic systems, because we need this constant water flow 24 hours, 365 days per year. So that's why there's a strong linkage also to our business model that we might develop for sustainable aquaponics business. And that leads us to the second part of our webinar today. How do we get from the business idea of an aquaponics business to a single business case? And usually we start, if we develop a business, with a fundamental idea, something that really only states what are we going to do and what is the main goal. So the scope of the business idea is very simple and rather broad, and it should provide a very clear and concise statement of the business's purpose and intended impact, right? So it serves us as a starting point for developing the business model and should capture the overall vision of what we are trying to achieve with our business. So what we capture in the business idea are mainly the what, the essence or core concept of the business. And in the case of aquaponics, this might, for example, be I want to create a closed loop farming system with minimal environmental impact, and that presents an alternative to traditional farming. And the answer to the question of why we are doing this, what's the inspiration behind my business idea, could be enhancing local food security or create some system that provides more resilience to climate change, or just a sustainable and resource efficient system that needs not that large plots as traditional agriculture, but smaller plots, and that also works without soil, which might be very interesting in regions where soil is not very good, or in city regions where soil is scarce. And the purpose of our business in the context of aquaponics, to give some examples, might be the production of fresh and sustainable and locally grown food, year-round food production, also production close to the local market so that we can do direct sales in the local market, or only production for self-sufficiency. And one very common way to capture the basic business idea is to create something that's called a mission statement. So a statement that really captures the idea of the business in something like one sentence. And if we look here at some examples of mission statements related to aquaponics, we can see that, for example, to cultivate fresh, sustainable, and chemical-free food while preserving natural resources and reducing our environmental impact through innovative aquaponic systems focuses quite a lot on the sustainability aspect of the business. While the third one, for example, to provide our family with healthy homegrown food at a reasonable price and to promote self-sufficiency through sustainable and responsible cultivation, focuses much more on the self-sufficiency aspect of aquaponic systems. And both are legit mission statements, but both also demand a different solution for the business model, because one might be a larger business on a larger scale with a larger market, and the second one is rather focused on just providing self-sufficiency to a family, which is quite a different business model. But it's also a valid business model to look into the feasibility of producing food for your own, and if it makes economically sense in the end. And that's why the different systems that can be looked at or derived from the basic business idea at the start of our business development have also quite different sizes. And I want to emphasize again that not all businesses in this context have to be corporations or huge companies. Also, a family unit can be looked at as a business if you want to know if it makes sense to produce your own food and if it's economically feasible and making sense. So the different sizes of systems that we might look at in our business models and business plans range from backyard systems that are only a little bit larger than 5 meters square. It's usually said that about hydroponic unit with a cultivation area of 25 meters square is large enough to provide vegetables and fish for a family of 4 people. Most of the time, these small units really only serve self-sufficiency, and they can be operated by non-professional growers because they are quite simple. And they can be found everywhere from rural areas to peri-urban areas and even urban areas because they really have only a small footprint. Then there are small-scale systems that range from about 50 to 1,000 meters square that oftentimes are used in the context of social enterprises or also education. They are run oftentimes by researchers if we are looking at education, or also career changers that just want to reorient themselves to a new business. And these systems most of the time make sense in a peri-urban or urban context. Then there are these medium-sized systems that can be quite an interesting business model, ranging from 1,500 to 3,000 meters square. They aim especially on the direct sales of the whole production of the system. This can be, for example, farmers that already have a farm market at their farm. And they are usually found in peri-urban areas where the farmer can hope for direct sales to the inhabitants of a city, for example, to have a market large enough to be able to sell the whole production of his system by himself and thus getting better prices for his produce. And that's why these medium-sized systems can make perfectly sense. And if we look at the large-scale systems that can range to several hectares of size, these are usually operated by commercial growers or professional growers, and they usually don't sell their produce directly, but they go through grocery stores or other distribution channels that help them to sell the amount of produce that you can produce in such a large system. So after knowing what our business idea is and what might be approximately the size of the system that we are looking at, we can start to define our business model. The business model is quite more detailed than the business idea. It also talks about the what and why of our business, and to some extent also about the how. It's still on a rather high level, so we don't talk about the details of our business, but rather on the mechanisms and how we make our business work on a larger scale. And some tool that is really useful if we want to create our business model are the so-called business model canvases. Here in this example, so you see a business model canvas that's called Lean Canvas. It captures the main parts of our business model that we should look at and don't forget about them. That's why these tools are so helpful, because they give us indications what we have to think about at this stage of business development, right? So we have these headlines like problem, solution, value proposition, where we can fill in the main description of our business on a higher level. So let's say, or I want to go into detail on the next slide. Yes. So if we are looking into an aquaponics related example on how to fill in these business model canvases, or lean canvas in this case, the problem that we are working on might, for example, be reducing the environmental impact of conventional farming, or handle resource scarcity, or helping to cover the demand for local and sustainable produce. And this is the solution we have in mind might just be in aquaponic systems, in different kinds of systems, like indoor or greenhouse setup. We would pick one of that for our business model that we think it makes sense. And we will fill in all these different cases to really define how our business will work. And very important here are that we already look at ways to make money with our business, right? Like look into the distribution channels, to whom are we selling our produce later, what kind of customers will we have, and also to create already an idea of what might be costs that are related to my new business, and what are possible revenue streams. And as I already said, depending on the size of our business, these might be quite different, like revenue streams from direct sales, or also wholesale partnerships, or even secondary revenue sources like educational tours or workshops. All these things we can cover with the help of a tool like a business model canvas. As soon as we have the rough layout of our business, we can start to develop a business plan, which is just the next step in getting into more detail, right? With every step from business idea through a business model to business plan, we are adding detail to our business idea. And the main detail that we add with the business plan is the exacter how and when of our business development. Meaning that we are giving a detailed idea of the operational status of our business at which time. So this should cover areas like the market analysis, market strategy, financial forecasts, an operational plan, and also some risk analysis that we can create based on our business plan to have an idea what might be potential risks for our business that might lead to a failure. The use of the business plan is to really guide us to the day-to-day operations, and also to help us to secure funding, because here we really lay out the roadmap for our growth, and the business plan really shows in detail how we are going to make money with our business, and brings the business model to life, right? So this is something like an actionable roadmap that helps us to start our business. Yes, so the how I already said is, for instance, the operational and financial and strategic steps that we have to take to make our business happen. And also we would say something about the timeline. When are we doing different things in the business development, and what are important milestones that we need to achieve, and stuff like that. And the main purpose of the business plan is to create some detailed financial projections, to have a detailed marketing strategy and operational schedules, and also specific action steps that are defined. One of the most important things in the business plan, from my point of view, is always a market analysis. And this in two directions. First, we need to know more about our potential market for selling our produce. So we need to understand our customers, their demographics, their dietary preferences, and their spending habits. we should know something about the competition on this market and how large the market is in total. But we also need to know something about the market on the other hand of our business, so of our supply chain, because we need a lot of material and consumables that we need to know where to get them and how to make sure that they have the right quality to make our business successful. So part two of the market analysis is always also to look into the supply chains for important consumables, like, for instance, fish feed, fingerlings, seeds for our plants, and all this stuff. And only if we have a really good idea of these two markets, selling our produce to customers and providing us with the consumables that we need to run our business, and if we have an idea of the price structure of both markets, we can do later on a detailed financial planning. That's why this part is so important. And because the selling of produce part is so especially important, we also should develop in this context some ideas about how are we going to sell our produce, how are we doing the marketing, how will we organize the logistics of selling the produce, and all this stuff that are linked to bringing really the produce to market. And if we have a better idea and understanding of the potential size of our market, we could also begin to define production goals for our business. But it's not only about the size of the market that we could potentially deliver our produce to, but it's also about what do we want to accomplish with respect to our own business. For example, it could be possible that one of our goals is that we just create enough work for our family to work in the business. I'm not talking about self-sustainability here, but really about creating a business. But then if we are a farmer family, we might not want to have too many employees. So we would try to size the business to fit to the potential labor that we can provide with what we have in our farmer's family. This might be different. You might want to employ a lot of people, then you can go much larger, but it might be an idea that you have in your head that you want to do most of the work on your own. Then you have to take this into account in addition to the market size, for example. And there might be other factors that influence the definition of the production goals. And if you know the production goals that you are aiming for, you can again plan in more detail for the resources that you need, the labor that you need, and have an idea of the exact system capacity. And this will again help you in creating a more detailed financial projection of your business. When you know how productive your system should be, you can go on to the next step and plan for the exact system setup that you would need to achieve these production goals. So the proper planning for the setup ensures that all the components are in place and they meet your operational standards and also align with your project budget. Because if you're planning for a system that's quite large, you also need substantial investment, and this should be feasible for you, looking at your own financial possibilities, but also if you're looking at how much money you would need from other sources. Lastly, you would do the operational plan for your business, so describing in more detail what will be day-to-day activities and processes required to meet your production goals and to maintain smooth operations of the whole system. In an aquaponic systems, this includes, for example, scheduling tasks like fish feeding or monitoring water quality, harvesting the produce, and managing system maintenance. And the operational plan details, again, the resource requirements that you have, like staffing of your system and workflows. And it describes clear procedures and responsibilities in your team for the operation of your system. And this again helps to identify in more detail how much labor will be included in running your system. And after having all this planning done and documented, you will have quite a good idea about the environmental feasibility of your system. So if it really is feasible to run this kind of system, when you look at the climate conditions at your location and also at the availability of water, because water is a really important resource for aquaponic systems. This is one of the main aspects this deciding about environmental feasibility, because if you don't have a good source of good quality water, you should not build your system at this location. Then you have an idea on the technical feasibility. You know, if you have all the technical knowledge and equipment that you would need to run the system or to set up the system, and also if you have the knowledge to operate the system, what would be answered in the operational feasibility. So this would inform you at least about what is potentially needed as knowledge to run the system. And this does not necessarily mean that you can't create your business if you don't have all the needed knowledge, but it gives an indication on what you would have to build up as additional knowledge to be able to really run the system safely once you build it. And then last but not least, you will have an idea about the economic feasibility because you can check in quite some detail if the business model is financially viable in the context of your local market.
Environmental feasibility. So I think that is one of the, and I'm happy that you've also emphasized on this in your previous webinars. So that it was something that I wanted to also just drive home the point. But there was nothing to add. All of this everything is covered there.
Yes. Great. So last part of the business development would be the different business cases. And there's quite some overlap with the business plan, because if we only have one business case and that's usually what's happening with smaller aquaponic systems, we only have one business case. There's quite some overlap, and it's more or less building the same document at the end. But in larger systems, we could have different business cases, like we could have the business case of selling produce from our aquaponic system, but we could also have a business case of doing workshops and stuff. And these are usually sub entities of our business plan, where the whole business that we create consists of different business cases. But oftentimes, this is more or less the same with the business plan, or just an extension of the business plan that is one-to-one. And that's where we usually find also our financial analysis of the business in detail. So one of the most important parts of the business case is really the financial plan, like the projected income, expenses, and the look at the profit that we might make. So we try to outline here the funding that we need in detail for setting up our business, and also to bridge the period in time that we need to ramp up our business to a point where we sell enough to get a profit out of our business, because this might take, well, sometimes a couple of months, sometimes also a couple of years, where we still need some funding to bridge this time until we get profitable. And then, of course, the projected cash flows in terms of revenues and expenses that we have while operating the system. And what we will find, if you look at the funding needs that we have to create our business, is what I just said, that we have the startup costs that are only initial costs, but also probably to bridge this time until we get profit. The operating expenses for labor, consumables and stuff. And then we have to look also, if you want to be correct, if there are any changes in the cash flow over the year, for example, and that we might have to cover some periods in the year where we don't make the same profit than in other periods of the year. And then we have to create a funding strategy for sources and also amounts of capital that we might need. And all this what we have to consider if we are looking at these different funding needs is that labor could come for free, for example, for a couple of business models, like if we do a backyard system to add to the self-sufficiency of our family. We don't have to pay for the labor in general, because it might be some family member that's running the system and we don't have to pay him. But the revenue would rather be what he produces in terms of vegetables and fish, and the price of it, if we produce this by our own, compared to what we would have to pay on the market for the same produce. And in terms of cash flow management, one very important point for larger businesses especially is that we should only produce what we already sold. So we should really have a good idea who will buy the fish that we are starting to produce, or who will buy the vegetables that we produce. Because if we are looking for the customers only after we harvested, it's very likely that we will have to throw away a lot of our production because we did not take care of the customers beforehand. So the best way to do larger aquaponic businesses is that we really have contracts with customers before we begin production. So at last, we will have a short look at cost-benefit analysis. That really is something like an Excel sheet where we put in all the expenses that we have and all the revenues, and then we can decide if our business is profitable and how profitable it is. Some of the most important metrics are the unit costs that we have in producing our product. That would be the sum of the variable production costs that vary with production amount. So if we produce more, we have higher costs. If we produce less, we have smaller costs, divided by the units that we produced, to have an idea how much does really one lettuce or one fish cost us in the production process. what remains of the sales revenue if we subtract the variable costs is called contribution margin, and that is what we can use to pay our fixed costs, like the investment that we have to reimburse, for example, or also labor costs of people that are employed and that we have to pay independently from the amount of produce that we are producing in a given month. And then one of the most basic metrics you're oftentimes asked for is a payback time, which would be the investment divided by the cash flow plus the depreciation, because usually if you look at the cash flow, you already have deduced the depreciation. So we will have a short look at an example that I prepared in terms of why can't I? Sustenance. So, no. Hang on a second. So yeah, you should see the Excel sheet now. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, great. This is a small example of a cost-benefit analysis for a safe system for self-sustainability based on market prices and investments we would find in Germany. But you could do something similar for the context where you're in. And usually you say that the typical size to feed a family of 4 people would be about 23 meters square of cultivation area on the hydroponic side. And I estimated that to create such a system as a backyard system in Germany would cost about 5,500 euros. And the depreciation period for this investment, I set to 5 years. So after 5 years, you would probably have to replace most of the system because it's used up. This could be longer or shorter. And that doesn't mean that after 5 years in practice, you can't use the system anymore. But this should be the period where you pay back more or less the investment at the latest. Then I set a repair rate of 2%. So 2% of this investment you would have to pay every year to do some repairs to the system. And I thought that the interest on equity would be 5%. That means that if I put this investment somewhere else, I would get 5% of interest out of it. So this would be what I compare with if I decide, do I put the money in the backyard system or do I invest in some other investments that might be interesting to me? And from that, I can calculate something that is called annual costs. That's something that we would have to take into account if we look into the amount of profit that we do. And if we look at the production side of our system, this backyard system might produce, I took something that is not very common, but I took trout here as an example for the fish, because this is something that we can do in Germany quite easily and is quite known by the Germans, and it doesn't grow too fast. And I wanted to have a fish as an example that is not growing very fast to make sure that our backyard system really can achieve this production goals that I was setting. So that's why I thought that I will only harvest fish once per year, and I will already harvest them at quite a small size of 350 grams, but that's something typical for trout. It's called a plate size for the trout. So that's typical what you eat. If you want to feed one person, you give her or him just one of these 350 gram sprouts. That's why. So I calculated, I went with the FCR of 1.4, what's not too high, like you know from previous webinars too. And that is what I based my fish production on. And at the same time, I took as an example only lettuce. And I said that I will grow about 16 lettuce on a meter square up to a harvest weight of 200 grams per lettuce. And as I don't want to heat the system at all, I thought that it might be feasible to do 8 cycles of lettuce per year. In practice, you would not do only lettuce in a backyard system. Yeah, you would also have different vegetables like tomatoes or whatever you would like to eat with your family. But for simplicity, I was calculating only with lettuce so that I don't have too many cultivars to look at to see how much could I produce with this backyard system and how much revenue that would produce. So if I take into account what the design parameters that I set, I see that I can produce about 32 kilograms of fish per year and almost 3,000 lettuces. That would be a lot to eat with your family. But as I already said, in practice, you would not only produce lettuce, but all different kinds of vegetables. And then to decide to which revenue this does correspond, I took a look at the farmer market here in my village, and I found out that in a mean price over the year, in summer it's a little bit less, in winter it's a little bit more. For the lettuce might be 80 cents per lettuce head of 200 grams. And about 6 euros per kilogram of trout. So the revenue that I get from the fish would be about 500 euros, and for the lettuce it would be 2,355 euros that I earn. And against this revenue, I would have to calculate the variable costs that consist mainly of electricity that I need to run the pumps for the system. And this I estimated with 300 kilowatt hours per year for both parts of the system. It's only one pump running, like I stated earlier, but I separated the cost for running this pump and the aeration pump to the 2 different system parts. Then I would need on the fish side a certain amount of small fishes that I calculated with €1 per small fish and 43 kilograms of feed to feed my fish the whole year long. And on the plant side, I would need seeds to produce my lettuce seedlings. And I calculated that I would only use substrate plugs, so the small plugs that are decomposable. That would cost me 10 cents per plug because I don't buy really large quantities, and that's why they are more or less expensive. But I looked up these prices too for the small quantities, so that's quite realistic prices. And we see that if we combine the cost for electricity, that's 150 euros for both parts, and that's quite a lot. But the substrate plugs are still more expensive. So this might be an interesting point to look at if we find out that our business case is not looking very good, that we probably find some alternatives to save a little bit of money on the substrate plugs. But if we look at the amount of fishes and the amount of plants and relate this to the variable costs that we have, we find out that to produce one fish, we would have to spend €2.60. And to produce one lettuce, we would have to spend 13 cents. And that, if we subtract that from the price that we set for fish and for lettuce, we have a contribution margin of 3.41 euros per fish and 67 cents per lettuce. And that's what we could spend to pay our annual costs from, or to have an idea on how much I potentially earn from the system. And the cash flow before taxes would be just this amount that we earn minus the variable costs minus the annual costs that we calculated earlier here on top. And if we do this calculation, we find out that the benefit cost difference for our aquaculture is just 11 euros. So we spend almost as much as we earn from our fishes. And on the plant side, we have still 934 euros that we gain. But this already takes into account also the depreciation of our system, right? So if you look at the most important financial metrics that are already presented a little bit earlier, we see that the payback period of our system would be 2.7 years. What's quite in the range that Ben mentioned earlier when he said between 2 and 3 years would be something that we really should aim for. We have, over the first 5 years of running our system, a return on invest of 86%, what's really not bad. And an internal rate of return for the first 5 years of about 25% per year. And this shows that in this case, if we would do this business the way it's calculated here as an example, this would be quite an interesting business for a family to do, because they would really earn a lot of money from running their own aquaponic system, taking into account that the labor for such a small system, as it's run by the family, comes for free, right? Because you see that we have not accounted for labor costs in this example, and that's typical for systems for self-sustainability, because we think first of all, it's not a lot of work per day. So it does not make up a whole employment, but only about probably 1 hour per day or something like that. And we think that the person that runs the system probably would not have an employment anyways. But still, if it has, this 1 hour, additional hour per day is still feasible. So things that we did not take into account in this small scale example would be things like a veterinary for looking after the health of the fish. We did not calculate the makeup water costs, because this small scale backyard system might not need a lot of water anyways. Obviously, we did not look into packaging or logistics for both of the parts. We did not use any additional lighting for the plants. We did not calculate for additional heating or cooling, and all this stuff you would probably need for larger scale business. Yeah, so you would have to include this into your Excel sheet. And we did not account for labor. So I think this is quite an tangible example for cost-benefit analysis. Ben, would you want to add something, or?
Just to add that this was also similar to one of the publications we had, whereby, I mean, the figures in terms of upfront costs, as well as the neglect of labor, family labor, we had around the same numbers, the same figures came out. However, some of the reviewers were critical about labor being free, and I believe Professor Olagbade also illustrated that in the chat, that labor cannot always be set aside as free. But just similarly to what you did, Mike, we felt that it was sometimes people see it as aesthetics. Sometimes people see it as a sacrifice for the family, and quantifying that might also be a bit tedious. But in order to at least calm the nerves of the reviewer, one can always, or in order to do a much more realistic approach, one can always go with the minimum wage as an alternative, for instance. And you say, okay, I would always input for labor a minimum wage of the country in context.
Yes. Yes. I did not do it here, so I don't know exactly how this would change the figures. But on the other hand, you could always look at the benefit that you do from the business as being the income of the person that runs the system. So it's not really that you don't have earnings from your labor, but they are not included as a cost category, but looked at as a benefit of the business at the end. So you don't have fixed labor costs, but something like what remains is what you get from your labor. So we are a little bit running out of time, I feel. So just let's conclude shortly what can be derived from our business case or cost-benefit analysis in terms of feasibility of the business case. We can decide on the financial feasibility based on the calculations that we just presented. We should make another time sure that the business case does well fit into the overall business of the entrepreneur planning the business. And we should also do a little risk assessment that we also could base on the cost-benefit analysis, because here we can look exactly on what's happening if some risks really occur. Like I have less production in a year, or some other reasons why my business is not running as smoothly as I planned for. Then we can look by changing some of the figures in our cost-benefit analysis, how this will influence the profitability of our business. And we can develop some mitigation plans to avoid these risks or to handle them. So only a few little words about the typical challenges that we encounter if we want to set up aquaponics business and that we have to take into account. One of the largest obstacles from my point of view is the high investment costs that are related to aquaponics, because we need a lot of technical solutions to improve just the efficiency of our system, like nutrient use efficiency, water use efficiency. All these benefits come with some technical solutions that we have to implement. And also to be able to produce soillessly brings the need for some technical solutions. So that's the main reason why the investment costs are relatively high compared to what we see in soil-bound agriculture, for example. Then another challenge is the underdeveloped market, like the benefits and advantages of aquaponics are not well known. Sometimes the type of produce is not known to the market that we want to address. And oftentimes the produce is also not affordable to the main part of the population. And this also might be a problem, because we might have a really cool product with high quality and sustainability and everything, but if the population can't afford it, that's a problem. Then, as we already said earlier, underdeveloped supply chains are really a huge problem that might be difficult to address. And the availability of energy and water is also a major concern if we are talking about establishing aquaponics businesses. So all these challenges really have to be addressed in our business plan. And we have to find solutions to overcome these challenges. And the same goes for the pricing of our produce, because we are most of the time finding ourselves in a challenging economic environment for aquaponics. And some of the main points here are that we have low prices in competition. For example, because we have imported produce that comes from countries that have excess production and that export it to our country where they sell it for really low prices. We have oftentimes subsidies for our competition that are probably not available for our business because it just fits into the same category. That's a problem of policy making. And we have this point of externalized costs that are oftentimes not calculated in produce of traditional farming, for example. Yeah, so we have a lot of advantages in aquaponics with regard to sustainability, eco-friendliness, and all these things. But the costs that we avoid with our technical solutions are just avoided by the competition because they just don't have to pay for it. But the community pays for this costs. And this is the main reasons why we oftentimes have a problem to really position ourselves with the prices that we would have to ask for from our aquaponics business compared to the competition on the market. Yes. So all these things we will have to address in our business plan, and some of the things we will have a hard time to address. And that's why in the larger context of aquaponics, there's still a lot of work to do in terms of stakeholder discussions and also policy making that we would really have to improve so that we really can make money out of all the advantages aquaponics has to offer. And I think that's something you already related to earlier in this webinar, Ben, right?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, exactly. It's with the different so it's internalizing the external cost, more or less.
Okay. So to conclude this webinar, I would like to give you another homework, and this would be to do some market research for a hypothetical or potential aquaponic system in your region. I would want you to find out prices for the most important consumables that you identify for running your aquaponic systems, like, for example, small fingerlings or fish for your aquaculture, the fish feed, the seeds that you might want to use, and also to find out about local prices, to have an idea about the structure of your local market for various vegetables like leafy greens, herbs, and also fish in different stages of processing, like living fish, whole fish without intestines, or also fillets of fish. Whatever you can find, please put that in an Excel sheet and send it again to Zala as a photograph or scan. So you can do it by hand too, no problem. Don't have to be an Excel sheet, whatever fits to your circumstances best. So this would be what we ask you as a homework. And that concludes the webinar for today. And we are a little bit over the time, excuse. And I hope this was helpful again. Thanks for your attention and see you soon.